Ladies and gentlemen, I feel like I have cracked the reason as to why we always relapse, even though doing so is against our self-interests. First of all, welcome back to the channel. My name's Lewis. You probably know that already, but if you're new here, then who the bloody hell am I to talk about addiction and relapsing? I'm a student of psychology. I've studied addiction for the last 3 years in my own time, and I've experienced addiction myself, and I've seen it in many people who I grew up with and people who were close to me as well. So I've been racking my brains as to why we always relapse, because there are a lot of bros on the internet who have many reasons as to why we relapse, but past a certain point, bro science is just a bit annoying, so it's beneficial to get into the science of it. Now, this framework is like the burning bush. When you see it, you won't be able to unsee it. As of right now, you've seen it, you have no idea what it means, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through it step by step. And I really think that when you see this, and when you understand each part, it's going to frame the relapse in your mind so much better. First of all, where's my pen? You've clicked on this video because you're struggling with addiction of some sort. Now, it can be anything. I'm talking about a compulsive behaviour which you engage in, which is against your self-interests, and that has a negative effect on your life. So that could be fapping, that could be watching adult films, drugs, alcohol, eating junk food, doom scrolling is a big one as well. So first of all, the main question we're going to tackle now is why, when we are experiencing a good period of life, everything is going well, we're feeling clear, we're off of the stuff that we were addicted to, why do we suddenly relapse when everything is going well? So in the first period is representing that good feeling in life. You're off the stuff, life is feeling good. Perhaps you're on NoFap for 3 years, which, pardon me, in my case, I started NoFap when I was 18, I'm 24 now, and I went 3 years clean. It took me about 90 days to actually get off it because I was addicted in my teenage years. But after 3 years of abstinence and realising that, I never want to do this thing again in my life, and I felt like I was completely off it, 3 years later, it crept back up again, and I found myself fapping, which was annoying. So this next part is the killer. This is what we're going to refer to as a cue. Now, you've probably heard that in regards to habit formation. Something happens in your environment which sparks a craving, which we'll get into next, for you to do that behaviour. Now, I want to preface this by saying when it comes to addiction of any sort, it's actually fairly simple to wean yourself off of the physical dependence that you have on that thing. If you look at alcohol addiction, it only takes about 2 weeks for you to actually cut the physiological dependence you have on that substance. Same with heroin abuse. But of course you have to get through the 2 weeks of hell, which is withdrawal and seizures. But in fact, when it comes to other addictions such as social media use or PMO or eating junk food, it's the same process. You have to go through an initial period of withdrawal where you physically wean yourself off of the addictive thing and your brain has a chance to rewire. Now, that is fairly simple, okay? You just stop doing the thing and you sit with the pain and you go through the detox. The hard thing is overcoming the psychological personality you have formed in your brain, which is acting completely against your self-interests. And what I mean by that is you have built, through years and years of doing this habit, a psychological mechanism in your brain that is reinforced to get you to do that behaviour. Now, this is what this framework is going to outline. We're going to counteract that. So let's imagine you've gone 3 years abstaining from NoFap. Life is good. Everything's going well. You're feeling motivated, you're feeling energetic. But then you're on the internet one day and you see a cue which is soft pornography, let's call it. Sparks that mechanism in your brain which you had hardwired for the first 15 years of your life. Came out of the womb doing it, fucking hell. Now what happens is after that cue is registered in your brain, what it sets off is a chain of craving. Now, this part is important, and this is where the molecule dopamine comes in. Now, you've likely heard of the molecule dopamine before, and a lot of people get it confused as the pleasure molecule. Now, the reason why that is because the initial studies that were conducted in order to discover dopamine, the scientists performed the experiments with drugs on rats, so they associated the rewards from drugs as pleasurable. But what we now know about dopamine is it is involved in craving. It's not involved in the actual pleasure that you derive from something, which highlights why liking and wanting are very different. They are two different things and they are governed by two different mechanisms in your brain. So, life is good. Cue arises. Then we start to crave for the thing that the cue has primed us to think about. You think about lighting up a joint. You think about doing a line. You think about drinking again. Or you think about doom scrolling. Now, the reason why this isn't a straight line is because of expectation. Because dopamine is involved in the anticipation of something, that's when we release it. Dopamine increases as our expectation of the potential payoff increases. When we engage in that behavior after the craving, which is this point here we're going to get to in a minute, when we get to that point, if the behavior exceeds our expectation of the payoff, huge dopamine spike. If it doesn't exceed our expectation and it actually is underwhelming, huge dopamine decrease. So we're fantasizing about the thing in our head, which this point as well is also increasing tension, and we'll put expectation as well. The reason why tension is important is the main reason why we relapse isn't necessarily because of the pleasure we derive from the thing. It's because we want to get rid of the discomfort we feel through holding on to the thought of not doing that thing. All of this is getting stored as latent potential and latent energy, which gets funneled into this 5-second moment, which looks like a hot dog, it's not. Now, this point is important, and the reason why I've drawn it as a curved line is because I've been doing a lot of research recently into dams, water dams, and how they're built. Now, if you don't know, the way a dam works, you see those huge things, is they're used to generate hydroelectric power, which the water is stored on that big, huge level that you see with the big wall around it, and it's gradually filtered down a little tunnel where it's used to turn these turbines which actually create the hydroelectric power, which can be used for other things. If I've got that completely wrong, please tell me, engineers. And the reason why that relates to what we're talking about here is because of the latent energy that I mentioned. So expectation increases, tension, tension, tension. Oh my God, I'm thinking about that thing. It's going to be so good. Expectation rises, rises, rises. And there is a threshold we reach where we have a choice to make. This part is what we're going to call the 5-second choice. And now the reason why it's a choice is because whether you like it or not, each time we cross above this threshold where we feel so compelled to act, where we have to channel this energy that has been rising from the thought of the craving, you choose whether to relapse or not. That is really important, and it's kind of the only harsh truth I'm going to mention here, but you're choosing to relapse. Now, I know there's a lot of arguments, especially within addiction, of the addiction, look, I have no choice, I'm just compelled to do it. Now, I'm not going to get into the genetics of it, but I think that framing addiction as something that you're just doomed to do and you have no control over is not the right way to go about it. And if you have that mindset, you're going to stand no chance at beating it, essentially. So, the reason why I've chosen 5 seconds, because in this moment, we have the choice of a few things. We can either choose reward 1, which equals relapse. And what happens here, if we engage in the relapse, is we engage in the thing, we drink, we scroll, we open up a tab we shouldn't, we meet the expectation or exceed it, but enjoyment plummets straight down. Because what you have to understand about the brain is there is a homeostatic element in the brain with pain and pleasure. So in short, the reason why you don't want to do anything after you binge watch YouTube for 5 hours is because you're tapping on the pleasure side of the equation all of the time when you're watching YouTube. You feel engaged, you feel socially connected, you feel entertained. And that is causing an imbalance between your pleasure-pain balance, which is governed by dopamine in your brain. So what the brain does in order to swing back to homeostasis is as soon as you stop that addictive behavior, it promotes a correlational feeling of pain to offset the feeling of pleasure you felt when you were engaging in that thing. So when you watch YouTube or you drink alcohol, you feel soothed, you feel entertained, you feel self-forgetful. The opposite of everything you'll feel when you stop doing it. Hence, when you're scrolling, you know while you're scrolling that it's a bad thing, yet the thought of stopping and embracing the discomfort of not scrolling is what propels you to keep scrolling because you're escaping the pain that you'll inevitably have to swing back to in order to compensate for the pleasure that you're engaging in. So that is the cost of relapse. Not only pain, but guilt, feelings of shame and annoyance with yourself. So the important thing to realise here, if you want to beat your addiction, is you don't just have one response. You have a few. You could choose in this 5-second moment to not engage in the thing, which sounds incredibly simple. We'll call it response 2. And that will promote a underwhelming expectation for this craving. But that's what you want. You won't feel the immediate release of tension because it will be a much longer lasting pleasure that you'll feel through engaging in whatever more beneficial activity you have replaced for relapsing. Going for a walk, meditating, doing something like yoga nidra, doing a workout. Things which take time for us to experience rewards of, but the rewards are much longer lasting rather than like we saw with this instant decrease in reward as soon as we engage in this thing, whatever it is. Now, to round this off and to actually look at this from a spiritual lens, because some of you do appreciate spirituality, what we're governing here is self-control, self-soothing, transmutation, replacement, and something that the yogis call wisdom-guided free choice. Because engaging in the relapse response, that's what your chimp brain wants, which is your limbic system, which only prioritises the here and now, and it just wants to fulfill its drives, which are procreate, stay healthy, and don't die, essentially. Short-term pleasure. The part of your brain you're going to have to engage here is the part of your brain which will set intentions and actually govern self-control and self-discipline. So your prefrontal cortex. And the way it does it is it engages in top-down processing in order to govern the other brain regions and to override them. So craving rises, thought, I could relapse and give my chimp brain what it wants by satisfying the craving, or I can redirect this energy which is being stored as latent potential into something much more beneficial. Now, everything I just said, you might be thinking, Lewis, that is a very long-winded way of saying just don't relapse. So allow me to clarify. The reason why I've highlighted this for you and for us really, because I deal with this as well, is because the last thing you need to understand is that we don't do this once. The amount of times we do this is in direct correlation to the strength of this response that we've created over how many years of our life. This is why most people don't overcome addictions. And I'm not going to stand here and say that overcoming an addiction is really easy. It's not. That's why there's so many videos on it. That's why there's so many books on it. And that's why we're still trying to figure out how to actually solve it. But the nub and short of it is you have to do this again and again and again and again and again every single day of your life whenever that cue arises. And you have to use reappraisal to understand that this sequence of events is going to happen, and you'll have to reach this threshold where the energy is being stored in the dam, and you have a choice. You have to transmute this energy into something better. You have to do it. You cannot sit there and not replace an addiction you have. This is the biggest problem that I see so many people deal with when they get on NoFap, or when they stop eating junk food, or when they want to quit out an addiction. They think, okay, this thing has a net negative on my life, I want to stop it. And they stop it and they don't replace it with anything. Stopping the addiction is a tool which will enable you to do other things. So first of all, get clear on what you actually want to channel this energy into, which is much more beneficial for you, and then you have to do it again and again and again. And the last thing I'll say, relapsing does not set you back to zero. It doesn't. It's very easy to think, I'm a piece of crap, I've relapsed, all has gone to pot, therefore all or nothing mentality, I might as well just binge my life away and screw the rest of the day. When you relapse, it sets you back a little bit. It sets you back to 70% maybe, depending on the severity of the relapse. So when you do relapse, don't think all is lost, all the previous progress I've made has lost. It's not. This is a really hard battle. Like, it really is, whether you're weaning off social media or whatever it is, this is such a hard battle to face, but you can do it. You just have to do it again and again and again. Fail and fail and fail, but less and less and less. Okay, you got this. If anything was unclear or I sounded like a rambling weird scientist who doesn't know left from right, then let me know in the comments. But anyway, adios amigos.